Welcome to the Hunger Action Heroes podcast. Hunger Action Heroes is a production of the Food Bank of the Golden Crescent. The Food Bank of the Golden Crescent was established in 1986 as the Community Food Bank in Victoria, Texas. Our mission is helping heal the hurt of hunger in our 11-county service area: Calhoun, Colorado, DeWitt, Goliad, Gonzales, Jackson, Lavaca, Matagorda, Refugio, Victoria, and Wharton. We passionately advocate for a hunger-free Texas. Your host, Chris Doelle, will bring you a message from our sponsor and get right into the episode. Stick around.
The Hunger Action Heroes podcast by the Food Bank of the Golden Crescent is made possible by the generous support of the HEB Hunger Relief Program. HEB Hunger Relief works year-round to fight hunger in Texas and Mexico. Hunger relief has been a key focus for HEB since the first store opened back in 1905. For more than a century now, HEB's commitment and involvement in the communities it serves has been an important part of the way the company does business. Since the inception of the Hunger Relief Program, HEB has donated over 1 billion pounds of food to help nourish neighbors in communities throughout Texas and Mexico. Thank you to the HEB Hunger Relief Program. All right, everybody, join me in welcoming CEO of Feeding Texas, Celia Cole, to the show. How are you doing, Celia?
I'm great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
You bet. I tell you, as jobs go, you know, that you go home at the end of the day and feel good about what you've done. That's got to be a good one, right?
Yeah, I do. I love my work and always have worked for mission-driven organizations. And yeah, it's great, especially when you don't have much work-life balance, you know?
Right. I get that.
Good to love what you do.
So fill us in where you grew up, how you got started in this kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm a Yankee, but I got to Texas as fast as I could. I've been living in Austin for 30 years now. But I did grow up in New Haven. And my family were teachers, mostly teachers, librarians and teachers. And they were, you know, really active in their community, very sort of socially conscious. I always joke that my family was always boycotting something or protesting something else. So I grew up with that kind of spirit of rebellion.
I love that. And then take me from East Coast to getting here, getting involved in what you're doing now.
Well, I also argue that I have 2 useless degrees. The first was a bachelor's in art history because I liked art and thought it would be fun to study, but graduated in 1991. And, you know, the economy was terrible and all my friends were either becoming paralegals or, joining investment banking firms to make a lot of money. And I had no clue what I wanted to do. So I decided to follow in the footsteps of my family and become a teacher. So I headed out to California and instead became a bartender.
I love that.
And I did that. I lived out there for 3 years doing that. But I also started canvassing for a group called Peace Action, which is like the original nuclear weapons freeze. And so I went door to door up and down the Bay Area, just talking about basically putting more money into human needs and less money into military spending. So I was there for 3 years. Got tired of being broke all the time. And it's like, I got to put my degree to work. And so I applied to a graduate program at UT in another kind of weird area, Latin American studies, again, with not much clue what I was going to do with it. But I was interested in Latin American politics and particularly Central American solidarity movements. And so I did get my master's at UT. And in the process, I just realized how much more interested I was kind of in social policy and domestic issues at home.
Right.
And then I just happened to get a job working for the Department of Human Services, where I learned a lot about the nutrition programs like SNAP, WIC, then the child nutrition programs. And then a job opened up as a policy analyst for a group that's now called Every Texan, used to be called the Center for Public Policy Priorities, as their nutrition policy analyst, which I never would have gotten because I didn't have a background in nutrition policy, except that I knew the names of all the programs because I worked at the state for 7 months. So, and did that for 14 years before the food banks recruited me to come run Feeding Texas.
Nice, nice. And so you walked into Feeding Texas as CEO.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Another strange turn of events. I didn't really have a whole lot of management background. I had mostly managed just interns and kind of been more of an individual contributor in my
Mhm.
prior role. But I'd worked a lot with the food banks during my
Yeah.
time at Every Texan because they were sort of like the boots on the ground and with, really more in touch with the needs of their communities than I was. I was at the sort of legislature and in the policy weeds and research side of things. But the organization that I worked for didn't do any direct service. So we didn't really have any connection to the community, and the food banks did. So we partnered on a couple of projects over the years. And one of them was on how kind of private and public food assistance intersect
Mhm.
in Texas. And so I knew a lot of them, they knew me, but I think they took a big chance on me when they hired me. And I was pretty lost for the first few years on the job.
Yeah, well, it seems like it's paid off for them.
Yeah, it has. It's been great. I think it's a job I feel like I'm good at. And I've always
Yeah.
had jobs where I've learned on the job because like I said, I've never sort of officially trained for anything. And I like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a tough ride at times, but I love the food banks. They do incredible work. They're incredible people.
Yeah.
And it's nice to work with people who are driven by the same values and committed to the same mission as you are.
I love that. And so as you started this role, what was kind of the biggest eye opener about whether it's the need or how the system works or how the
Yeah.
people work? What opened your eyes the most?
Well, I wasn't surprised by the need because, again, I sort of was in a job where there was a lot of statistics gathering. And so I knew the numbers. I knew hunger was a really big issue in Texas. I knew it was really widespread. I think what I didn't realize is just how vast the food bank network is in
Yeah.
Texas, just how many pounds of food they move every year. Um, how many other programs they're involved in running. I think it was just, I used to say that they could spin straw into water, I mean, straw into gold, because they do. They're so
Yeah.
industrious, but also creative. And so unlike the government, I think they're just really
Right.
quick to pivot when they need to. I think that's why they were so effective during the pandemic. While everyone else was shut down and trying to figure out, what to do, food banks really sprang into action. So I think that sort of scrappiness
Mhm.
and just the size, the scope of what they do was probably the biggest thing.
Nice. Yeah, yeah. You mentioned the different areas they go into. I too was shocked by that. The fact that they're running farmers markets and they're
Right.
doing home delivery. They're doing so many weird things that you think of, at least I did, was, hey, this is a building where homeless people can come and get food.
Right. And it's
And
not
that's not
homeless
it at
people
all.
either.
Right.
I think that's the thing, the myth that most people,
Yeah.
springs to mind when they think about food banks or food charity, charitable food assistance, or any government
Mhm.
program. It's like it's homeless people, it's deadbeats who won't work. And it's, of course, there's a very different face of hunger, many faces of hunger in Texas,
Right.
but it's a lot of families with kids. It's a lot of seniors. It's people who are out of work. And it is a lot of people who are chronically, unemployed or underemployed.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So talk to me about how Feeding Texas works with the food banks, because they're, like you said, it's a big network of food banks in this state.
Yeah, there's 20 of them. They're all members of Feeding America. So they make
Mhm.
up about 10% of the whole Feeding America network. And I think we're one of the largest state associations in the country, probably the largest behind Florida. Um, so we do a couple of things. One, I think the most important role we play is advocacy, is public policy
Right.
advocacy. So we're kind of their voice at the legislature, whether that's advocating for resources to help food banks do what they do, or for programs that send resources directly to families that are facing hunger. So like SNAP or the child nutrition programs.
Mhm.
And then, part of that also involves just raising awareness of hunger at the state level and raising awareness of what food banks do. Because like we just talked about, there's a lot of myths out there, right, about what food banks do and what food banks can't do. I think that a big part of our job is to say, you know, we cannot end hunger alone. Like food bank, we're not going to food bank our way out of hunger. We need a strong public nutrition safety net, and it takes a village really to end hunger. So I think both pointing out what food banks can do and where they need support is a key role that we play as well. And then we manage a couple of big government contracts that help food banks do a couple of different things. One is to help people apply for benefits like SNAP and Medicaid. So we have about 160 caseworkers statewide stationed at our food banks, and that are helping people daily just navigate kind of the maze of public benefits and helping them apply. And, that's a contract with the state. So we hopefully send people to the state with complete and accurate applications, and that makes the state's job a lot easier. And it makes our job a lot easier because we're getting people out of our lines and into the grocery store. Another big contract we run similar is resources, dietitians at food banks to do nutrition education and run other kind of health-related nutrition programming to give people the tools they need to shop on a budget, pick out the right foods, know how to cook them, things like that. And then another big role we play is in disaster response. Or really crisis response now, since disaster can obviously mean a lot of both natural and man-made disasters. But really we play kind of a statewide coordinating role there in kind of helping to manage the flow of food and other donations and monetary donations and things like that, so that the food banks can focus on what the disaster at hand and not answering phone calls about people wanting to make donations. So we work very closely with Feeding America during disaster to kind of route food and water and other supplies to food banks. So those are the main roles. I think, there's obviously things that are less tangible, like just kind of trying to align efforts across our network, to make sure that we are doing the things that are the most impactful, that are going to be most likely to move the needle. And then again, just bringing in those big pots of government money and other sort of big pots of money to support our strategies and our feeding people.
Excellent. And you mentioned Feeding America. Talk about the distinction between a state organization like yours and Feeding America, which is the United States.
Yeah, we're a little bit of a mini version of Feeding America. I mean, they play a similar role in supporting food banks. I mean, they're the largest, anti-hunger organization in the nation. When you count all the work the food banks across the country do, we're the largest anti-hunger organization in Texas. So they do similar things in terms of supporting food banks. They do a lot more fundraising on behalf of food banks and food raising. They have really close relationships with national retailers and manufacturers at sort of all points of the food supply chain. So they bring in a lot of food for food banks, are a big source of that. And we don't do as much of that. We do manage a couple of contracts. One is funded by the state to help food banks source produce donations, which is a really important program. And then we also administer a federal contract that helps food banks build relationships with smaller, sort of socially disadvantaged producers and buy product directly from them. But we're not bringing in as much food and as much funds as I think Feeding America does. So there's a lot of similarities, just they're so much bigger than us and their scope is much larger in terms of how they support food banks. But again, they lobby Congress, we lobby the legislature. So we work really closely with them where sort of our roles overlap, and so they really look to us to understand like the policy, political environment in Texas. We look to them to help us understand what's going on in Congress, and it's a very sort of mutually beneficial relationship.
Excellent. And you mentioned corporate donors. When, in Texas, when we think of groceries, we think of HEB. And here locally in the Victoria area and the 11 counties that the Food Bank of the Golden Crescent serves, HEB is the big player. Yeah. How does a company like that coordinate that? Is it through the food banks? Is it through you? Is it through national? How does that work?
Really through all mostly directly with food banks, but they also work closely with Feeding America. They will provide food to and funds to Feeding America as well. Sometimes they work through us. A lot of times they'll connect us to one of their, like a company, a food company, and help us set up sort of fundraising campaigns directly with that company. But HEB, I mean, they essentially started the food bank movement in Texas. I mean, they really, in some ways are sort of like the father of food banking in Texas. So they started kind of what they called a food assistance program many decades ago with the, sole purpose of connecting, surplus retail food to food banks. And, HEB is a very mission-driven company. And so, their heart has always been in it, and they've always done it for all the right reasons and been just a tremendous source of support over the years.
Yeah, we can't say enough good things about HEB. They're not only the best grocery around, but in fact, they're the major sponsor of this show. So well,
I was going to mention other retailers. Like, I don't want to. We get support, from across a wide swath of retailers, and really, it depends on where you are. So some food banks have, have relationships with retailers that don't serve other areas. But they've been great. We really, during times of disaster, sometimes they're there before anyone else is, and. So they do a lot of specific events directly with food banks. They have an annual feast of sharing and just lots of really wonderful things. And they're work very closely with Feeding America too, and come to national conferences and things like that.
Nice. And so tell me about in your tenure there, what have you seen in terms of changes as it comes to Feeding Texas?
Well, I think the biggest change is just the extent to which our neighbors facing hunger are relying on charitable food assistance. So, and obviously the number of people needing help has grown a lot for a lot of different reasons. But I think more people are looking to food banks to be more of a regular source of food. So I think originally it was sort of, coming to people in true times of crisis, and this sort of idea, we really at one point were an emergency food assistance network, but that's a misnomer these days because there are so many people that are turning to their food bank on a regular basis. So they are chronically food insecure. And that's a big shift. Some of that has to do with, I think, just the overall sort of safety net in this country not being as strong as it used to be. Some of it has to do with wages not keeping pace with the cost of living. Lots of factors, but definitely the volume of need, the diversity of need, the regularity of need, all of that has changed. And so I think food banks have really pivoted in response to that. I mean, they've grown a lot too to try and keep up with that need. They recognize now that for a lot of people, if they're going to be a regular source of food for them, their food has to be nutritious. So it's not just canned goods and dry goods and cakes and cookies of the past. It's like they're really committed to having whatever the food they distribute look kind of like USDA's My Plate, so it's what people need. I would say close to half of all the food we distribute right now is produce. So that's really changed. They've really changed the kind of food and their commitment to sort of nutrition and improving health, as well as just getting people's immediate needs met. And then I think the other area is recognizing, and I think I said this earlier, we're not going to food bank our way out of hunger. Private charity alone is not going to solve the problem. And even a well-funded, very robust nutrition safety net alone is not going to solve the problem, that people don't just wake up in the morning and out of the blue, like, oh my God, my fridge is empty or my cupboard is bare. It's like there are upstream causes. There are what we call root causes that are leading people to, situations where they don't have enough money to regularly afford food. So, and then there are, of course, these downstream consequences. So it's not just the ache of an empty belly or sort of the moral, problems of people not getting fed and kids going hungry. But it's also just serious health consequences, serious loss of sort of academic potential, lots of stress. I mean, these are sort of lifelong problems that are associated even with sort of an intermittent bout of hunger or food insecurity in childhood. So, and obviously that comes with a huge human and economic toll for the state of Texas. So food banks have started largely through partnerships with organizations that are specifically focused on those upstream causes and downstream consequences to really kind of get more to the root of the problem. And a lot of food banks call this shortening the line because, we can feed the line that's outside our doors, but what can we do to really shorten it? And really, help people build generational wealth and escape the cycle of poverty. So that's also fairly new, I would say, in the last decade, that sort of expansion into those other areas.
Got it. And your opinion, you mentioned Texas is like 10% of, the nationwide need. You've got states like Texas and Florida, which are just adding citizens, way above the average of is it mainly because of the population explosion, or is Texas doing something different that is causing more people to fall through those cracks?
I don't think they're doing anything more different than they've ever done. I mean, poverty and hunger has always been more prevalent in the South for a lot of different reasons. I think, we're very much kind of a pull yourself up by your own bootstraps kind of state. And so we often have to point out when you don't have boots, you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But, it's a kind of a small government state.
Yep.
And I don't know that we don't always adequately fund public or human services. And I think that is not unique to Texas, but we have a very conservative legislature and, that does not want to, I think, has not been willing to invest as much as we think they need to in poverty fighting programs. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big driver. Obviously the national environment has just gone downhill in recent years, and that's not also unique to Texas, but I think we see a lot more division than we used to. And that just makes, negotiating kind of common sense consensus solutions harder. So I think everyone in Texas, every politician and every person in Texas agrees that hunger shouldn't exist. Right. We all agree it's a problem. And we all, I think where we sort of diverge sometimes in our thinking is like, what's the right solution? Right. And when the state wasn't as politically polarized, the nation wasn't as politically polarized, figuring out kind of how to bridge the divide between the two camps, like what's the right thing to do, has gotten harder.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And at the top of the show, you mentioned that one of the things y'all do is awareness. Talk to me about what people are not aware of that you need to get out to them, because this is a great venue.
Yeah, I mean, kind of goes back to some of the myths we were talking about earlier, but I think helping people understand the sheer size, the scope of the problem, like that, 1 in 6 Texas households faces food insecurity, and 1 in 5 Texas children is likely to live in a food insecure family. So, I mean, those are big numbers. So I think that's the first thing. This isn't an isolated problem. It doesn't happen to someone else. These are our neighbors. It can be people you work, eat, shop, and pray with, and it touches every county in the state. It's not just affecting one segment of the population. It does disproportionately impact certain populations more than others, but the faces of hunger, like I said, are really diverse. And then I think also just helping people understand that being hungry or being in a state of food insecurity is not a result of an individual failing. Like, it's not because people are doing something wrong. We have lots of people working and doing everything right and still struggling to feed their families. And so helping people understand some of the more systemic causes, some of those root causes, I think is really important, because you got to understand the causes of the problem in order to come up with the right solution. And I think also helping people just understand those consequences, that it isn't just sad that a kid goes hungry. When that kid goes hungry, they can't learn. When they can't learn, potentially their neighbor in class can't learn. And that's just, it's costing us as a state and as a nation.
Yeah. And so talk to me about what are the important legislative battles going on right now, because there's some states where they've made it illegal to raise chickens. They've made it illegal to collect rainwater or to keep raw milk, all these things that can help. But again, what are the battles you're fighting?
Yeah, well, it's great that you mentioned some of the policies that can really impede people from growing their own food, selling their own food. I think we're really committed to strengthening local and regional food systems. And through a partnership in the upcoming session, we're really going to be working to change sort of the rules around ag valuation to help smaller producers. But I think at the federal level, the big kahuna is the Farm Bill. It's something Congress has been negotiating for several years now. It funds both conservation and ag subsidies, but also all the nutrition programs, primarily SNAP, and then the big program that helps food banks, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TFAP. And that program is responsible for about a third of the food we distribute, and it's all pretty highly nutritious stuff. So just been waiting 2 years to see that Farm Bill get reauthorized. It keeps getting punted down the road. And, so we've been very active lobbying with Feeding America to try and get increased resources for SNAP and TFAP in that bill. And then at the state level, obviously we have a legislative session coming up. We have a couple of big priorities in addition to the ag valuation one I talked about. So the states really struggle to get people who are eligible for SNAP enrolled quickly. So people sometimes get stuck in a months-long backlog. Then they end up in our lines, which is not where we want them to be. So we are going to be working on both making sure there's enough resources for the state enrollment system to run well, and then looking for some simplified enrollment process to make it easier for state workers to get people enrolled on time. And then one of our really biggest priorities is making sure the state implements a new summer hunger program called Summer EBT. It's not a sexy name, but basically it runs off the EBT, the electronic benefits transfer card that people use when they're on SNAP, would participate in SNAP. That's why it's called Summer EBT. But the idea is when kids get out of school in the summer, they lose access to free meals.
Right.
So we see hunger spike in families with kids always in the summer months. And then you add to that, they're paying more for electricity, and all of that. So it's a really challenging time for low-income families. And this program essentially provides on the same EBT card, I think it's $120 benefit per kid that is enrolled in free or reduced price lunch during the school year. And we missed the deadline to get our act together to get it running this summer. And so we'll be working make sure the legislature understands the importance of this program to fighting summer hunger and that the resources are there to get it going in summer of 2025. So those are the big things where, so things always come up out of the blue. We have a couple of other bills we're working on, again, in partnership with other organizations to address health. We're really interested in sort of pushing food as medicine policies so that food banks can partner with payers, with managed care organizations, and get reimbursed for putting together healthy food boxes for people like pregnant women who are at a nutritional risk and kids at a nutritional risk. So we're going to be working on legislation to kind of make it easier for those partnerships to happen. Yeah, so it's going to be a busy session. And then lots of defense. You never know who's going to decide to push some crazy bill that actually makes hunger worse.
So for people who've been listening and they're like, wow, I really want to help. I can think of like 40 different ways. How do you direct people the best way to help?
Time, money, voice. So if you have time and can volunteer at your food bank, this is very much a volunteer supported network. We could not do what we do without the millions of volunteer hours that are donated every year. So people can find their local food bank by going to feedingtexas.org, and you can just enter your zip code and figure out where your food bank is. Money, we welcome food donations, but we can do so much more when people make financial donations. So if you can, please contribute to your local food bank, or you can make a donation to Feeding Texas and support the work that we do at the state level, raising awareness and advocacy. And then the third voice is, be a hunger fighter, be aware of what the problem and speak up about it to your elected officials. And people can get connected to our work at the legislature, again, at feedingtexas.org. They can sign up for updates and become a regular advocate.
I love it. I love it. Celia Cole, gosh, I want to thank you so much for sitting down with me, sharing some of your story and the story of feeding Texas.
Thanks, Chris. It's been great to talk to you.